Hello everyone, welcome to class 4. We're going to be finishing with colonial times and trying to start with some ideas as regards the beginning of the road to independence. So to start with, let me show you a short video to have some images as regards how the first settlements developed into prosperous colonies. This little video begins right after Thanksgiving.
Brought people to these shores to colonize.
It's the start of a period of prosperity that will transform North America. From Jamestown and Plymouth, their descendants grow across the landscape. As more and more people cross the Atlantic, thousands, tens of thousands, people with different backgrounds, with different reasons for being here. America becomes the place for everybody from everywhere. Rolling the dice, coming together to create 13 colonies. From Jamestown, agriculture spreads across the South. Dirt farms transform into sprawling plantations. Irish, Germans, and Swedes push back the frontier. The Dutch bring commerce to a small island at the mouth of the Hudson River. In time, it will be named New York. The colonists are 2 inches taller and far healthier than those they left behind in Europe. The Puritans average 8 children, and they are twice as likely to survive to adulthood. They are 20% richer and pay only a quarter of the taxes of those in England. Many still think of themselves as British, but each generation grows further from its roots.
Hello everyone, well, now let's get going with our presentation. All right. So, as we were saying, we're going to be talking about what happened during the 17th century in the colonies of North America, right? Well, as you saw in the video, after the first difficult beginnings, the first settlements started developing into prosperous colonies. As we said in class, more and more people started coming from England into the English colonies, and they started populating the lands, right? And each of the colonies had its own identity, right? We mentioned Georgia, which was started as a colony for prisoners, something similar to what happened in Australia, or the Pennsylvania, totally different kind of colony, colonized by Quakers. Yeah, this charter to these lands was given by the king to William Penn, who was a true Quaker. And Quakers are very different from Puritans. As we also said in class, they are pacifist. Their relationship towards the natives was very different from the Puritan ones. They actually bought the lands from the Native Americans. And well, Quakers are a very interesting group, right? We don't have time to devote more to these people, but keep in mind that they have a very different approach, for example, to the role of women, right? They are very much more open in this respect. And well, Pennsylvania will be will have one of the most important cities in the colonies, which is Philadelphia. All right. What we're going to try and understand today is how functional were the 13 colonies to the mother country, right? Because of course, we know why the empires of the 16th century were fighting to get to the new land, to the new world. But now we're going to try to understand the economic aspect of this relationship and try to place it in a bigger picture, right? The picture of the economy, the Atlantic economy. To understand this game, we've got to talk about mercantilism. Mercantilism is a system, yes, it is an economic system. At the time, nobody called it like that, but to analyze it, this is the name that was given in economics later. How does it work? The idea is that, and we're talking about here the modern times. When we say the modern era, remember, is the 1500s and the 1600s. So during these times, the idea of economy was the following. There was a limited amount of wealth in the world. When we say wealth, we mean bullion. Bullion is a concept in English that means gold and silver, right? So this, the amount of bullion in the world was limited. And nation states, and I've written some examples here, England, Holland, nation states competed among each other to get the biggest share. Which was the way to acquire this, to have the biggest share, and in this way be the most powerful nation? Well, the idea was that the nation should have the biggest amount of gold and silver possible. And when we say the nation state, we mean the mother country, right? So the treasury should be as full as necessary. Of course, for Spain, this was easier at the beginning because it had all the mines from the South America. Now, what about those nation states which didn't have this amount of wealth, gold and silver? Well, they would have to get it through a favorable balance of trade. How do you do it? Well, you should have more exports than imports. That is to say, you should sell more than you buy. In this way, by selling, the nation would get more wealth into the country. So this is the idea of mercantilism. So each nation should have a favorable balance of trade by exporting more than it imported. The idea was economic self-sufficiency in the long run. Now, how do colonies, or which role do colonies play in this game? Well, the mother country would receive raw material from the colonies. Here we have gold, silver, if possible, in the case of Spain, but we know that for the English colonies this was not possible, so they would refer raw material, fur, lumber, foodstuff, tobacco. In return, the mother country would sell manufactured goods to the colonies. So the colonies would play this double role of providers of raw material and customers. Now, in order to regulate this, the English government created or passed laws and acts that would limit in a certain way the way in which the colonies would trade with Europe. These regulations are known collectively as the Navigation Acts. And here we have some examples. For example, only English or colonial merchants could legally trade in the colonies. Or, for example, certain valuable American products could be sold only in the mother country or other English colonies. And there was a set of enumerated goods for this, right? Wool, sugar, tobacco, indigo, and later raised and naval stores. And then finally, another set of navigation acts said that foreign goods for sale in the colonies had to be shipped through England, all the way through England, and then would go to the rest of Europe. And of course, paying English import duties. And then later on, the colonies, there was another principle in which the colonies could not export items, such as wool clothing or hats, that could compete with England. For example, as we said, clothes, not hats. So, in this way, of course, the colonies were functional and they were limited, or their business was limited to profit, to the profit of the mother country, that is to say, England. Now, what about the reaction, which was the impact of these navigation acts in the 1600s and the beginning of the 1700s in the colonies? Well, it wasn't a negative, there wasn't a negative impact because the colonies were very prosperous. Remember, we said that, and we talked about the kind of industries, tobacco was booming. So in this period, even though there was a limitation for the trade, limitations for trade for the colonies, this didn't affect so much because they were really making a lot of money, the colonies, at the time. And do not forget that the colonists are English subjects, so they feel part of the nation. So this will end at one point, abruptly. We're going to read about it. There comes a point when all these regulations stop being accepted. Remember the following important point. These regulations, all these acts, are managed through taxation, right? So there is a law, but for the law to be enforced, you need taxes. That is to say, if you do something that is not what I want, okay, you have to pay a very high taxation. So taxation was the tool by which these acts were imposed by. And also, there were, of course, there was at the time quite a lot of smuggling, right? England would turn a blind eye to certain activities. And this was a period known as salutary neglect. Salutary is an old word for healthy. So like England would let's say, would let the colonies a little bit of freedom in certain issues, while, or as long as they kept most of the trade and the regulations abiding to the laws of England. Now, what this resulted in is a situation, a global situation that now is studied as the triangular trade. And we say triangular trade because, between inverted commas, because it is not exactly triangular. But notice how this worked. Analyze this map. We're going to talk about it in the Zoom class, but just for you to focus, take a look at the goods that go from the colonies to England, and all of them to England, so that they pay duties there. Then England would sell manufactured products to the colonies. We talked about why this is it, only in that direction. And notice as well that they would also take manufactured products to Africa, where that would be exchanged for, yes, you guessed, well, for slaves. And it's not only manufactured products, there's something missing there. They would also take guns to Africa. Important to remember, key, the people in Africa, and these are not political units that are, let's say, big enough or with an identity that we can say Africa or a nation, but rather tribes, which, well, worried or they kept warring among each other. So what the situation was that no European would go inland to catch slaves. But what happened was that chiefs from enemy tribes would capture enemies in battle, and those prisoners would be taken to the coast and sold to the middlemen, to the slave traders that were Europeans, yes, at first Portuguese, and very quickly the English all took over the business, and these would be the ones that would take the slaves in terrible, appalling conditions across the Atlantic. When I say appalling, it falls short to what really happened on those ships where human beings were taken as if they were cattle, yes, or even less, right? So no sanitary conditions whatsoever. People would die many would die on the way, and corpses were, of course, dropped in the middle of the ocean. And of course, do not forget that all these tribes didn't share the language and their culture, so these people were taken away from their world and thrown into something completely different. That's why it was also easier for the planters to manage them, because there was no sense of unity. It was an array of prisoners from different tribes and with different even languages, as we said. The slaves would go mainly to the West Indies, yes, what we call today the Caribbean. That's why today we have so many black people living in the Caribbean islands. When you go to Cuba, to Haiti, to many of those islands, well, black people come. These are Africans that have been taken against their will, right? These are the descendants of those people. And the other, if you follow the arrows, the other destination was the south of the English colonies. And we talked about why the labor-intensive plantations were in need of this kind of labor. Notice that all these, and everybody profits from this system, right? Except for, of course, the slaves. But reality, I mean, the sad reality is that this system is the basis of capitalism. The original accumulation of wealth that permitted, in the long run, to have capital to push the Industrial Revolution was based on the blood and suffering of millions of people, and of human beings. We have to. That is something that, right, it is sometimes overlooked. So this is the triangular trade, and the only way to understand why these conditions were the ones that endured all through the 1600s and 1700s, right? It worked for everyone. Now, essential to the system, as we said, was slavery and the slave trade. these concepts you need, please, to be able to tell one from another. This is not the same. Slavery is the actual system, the institution within the nation by which bond people work and live and are property of an owner, in this case a planter. Yeah. So this is chattel slavery. That is to say, this slavery is not because, as in Roman and Greek times, because they were prisoners of war, but rather this kind of slavery is a property, that a piece of property that can be sold and bought. And you have to think it in that way in this subject. Otherwise, you won't grasp the importance of slavery as a source of income, right? It's essential, as we said also in class, to the economic system of the southern colonies. While slave trade, here we have a picture, has to do with, remember this business of just taking the slaves from Africa to America, which was a horrible business as well, but it entailed a different kind of a system. Although one complements each other, but you will see that in the 19th century, slave trade will be abolished, but not slavery. So it is not the same, right? Now this is a meme. I found it for us to revise this the concept of salutary neglect that I was mentioning before, right? This idea that England would, well, endure, or I don't know, put up with certain things that were not perfect in the colonies, but just to keep the relationship going with these very prosperous, as we said, and rich colonies. So there you have a nice meme to remember. There are lots of memes for American history, so if you find more that can be connected to a subject, share them in our stream in Google Classroom. It will be fun and useful for revision too. Now, part of this neglect had to do with a very important fact, and we're going now from economy to politics, right? We're kind of rounding off the nature of the North American colonies. And this is where we're going to make a point. We're going to analyze a little bit of the political structure of each of the 13 colonies. As we said, there is no virrey, there is no one central government in English North America, but rather 13 political units, all of them under, of course, they are all subjects to the British Crown, but as regards the running of the affairs, of the everyday affairs of each colony, the Crown has no business. It doesn't take a special care. The Crown and Parliament are interested in, as we said, international trade, custom duties, and the triangular trade. As long as that works, and this is very English, you know, English people are very businesslike. I mean, this at least the stereotype, right? As long as the money was all right, then politics, local politics, could be left to the colonists themselves. So this is very important because this is the seed, as many historians have pointed out, this can be seen as the seed of self-government in the US. So in each of the 13 colonies, we will have governors. So how many governors? 13, right? Who chose the governors? Who chose the governor? Do you know? Well, the governor was appointed by the Crown. That was true. It was not chosen by the colonists. But the governor had limitations to his power. Look, well, we know that he had final approval on laws and he could dismiss the assembly, as it says here. But the governor had, and I would like here to make a comment as regards first one, this one, the colonial assembly. The governor power was limited by the colonial assembly. The colonial assembly was a gathering of the most important men in the colony. That is to say, just, for example, in the colonial assembly of, let's say, Maryland, only property owners could vote and choose some delegates to send to the assembly. So each of the towns in Maryland would send a representative, yes, and those delegates, let's say, would gather in the colonial assembly and decide on the everyday affairs of the colony. Notice that they could make laws, local laws, of course. They had authority to tax. This is key. That is to say, let's imagine that in Virginia there was a necessity for a bridge, yes, to be able to carry the tobacco or certain products. Who's going to pay for that bridge? Not the central government back in London, not at all. Who? The colonies themselves. So they would, in the assembly, they would decide together, vote, and say, okay, we're going to have a tax for all the colony inside, we said, Virginia, just for 2 or 3 months, or how the length that was decided, to pay for this bridge. So notice how, from the very beginning, the North American colonies who were using taxation and as a power, it was a very powerful tool to decide. This will be key in the Revolutionary War. So we decide things because we pay our taxes. Even today, you can listen to that in the news. Well, we are entitled to this. If I pay my taxes, why shouldn't I get this and that? And notice also that they didn't have paying the governor's salary, right? So whenever a governor was not friendly enough with the assembly, well, they could very easily stop paying its salary, right? There was also a council appointed by the governor, which worked for advice and also as the highest court. But the institution that I want you to really try and have as very unique to the North American colonies is the assembly. If you think of our case, there's nothing close to that in colonial times, because the Cabildo was, well, an institution at town level, and only in big towns, they could only make decisions just for the town, and taxation was out of the question. This is something different, right? And this is one of those differences that we have to take into account. Important for you to remember, in your text, you read about the House of Burgesses. Here you have a copy of, well, some of the journals. Well, the first assembly took place in Virginia, yes, and it was called the House of Burgesses. In the text, this is what you read probably last time. But later on, all these gatherings will be called colonial assemblies. So a very high degree of self-government in these colonies. Right, so we are closing colonial times. There are many more things to say, but we're going to finish and closing this idea of colonial times, so that then we can go on to why, when, and what point this very fruitful relationship between mother country and colonies started to break. But we have to understand first the status quo. In order for you to understand this, where we have selected some readings that will be attached to class 4, and you have a little activity connected to the Scarlet Letter. This is a piece of a movie that you will have to connect with a text, a short text, but very quite to the point, that describes the Puritans' beliefs, the main ideas that are part of the Puritan mind. So there you will find an activity. This is not an assignment, you don't have to hand it in, but do take notes because we will discuss it in class. That is to close colonial times. And then as a first step to start thinking about which was the turning point in which, well, relationships with the mother country started to get a little bit more difficult. You're going to watch a short a documentary about the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War is the nickname in America for the 7 Years' War. If you studied, if you have done your English history too, perhaps you remember. This is a video it's a short documentary or flash better from History Channel. History Channel is a good source. You can use it, but always remember that it is it's very patriotic, right? So you will see that it ends in a high note as regards Washington, etc. But well, taking into account the source, we can anyway use it to get acquainted to the turning point in American history, which is the French and Indian War. You will see why. And then number 2, you have an online quiz to do. This you will get the link. This is not something we're going to evaluate, but I do, and we do recommend you to take the quiz. It's not long, but it will help you a lot to clarify some ideas. So people, this time you have the readings are not long, but you have videos to watch, activities to do, and then we will meet again next class. So have a wonderful week. I hope that you have profit from this presentation. Bye-bye.